two, one.
Hi, welcome everyone. We are back to third show of the Integrating Investor, if you can believe it. Series is rolling on. Now today, I'm very excited for this episode. I'm joined by John Tamny, and this is a real treat because John is one of my absolute favorite thinkers these days. Kind of before we get into that, I just want to give a quick shout out to Marvin for his generous donation during last week's show. Still working out the kinks. And I should have mentioned that. I'm really sorry. And again, just a reminder, please hit that like button. Please share this out. This is a new series. We're trying to get the word out. We only distribute through social media. Unfortunately, that's just the way it goes. So liking and sharing is very, very helpful, very important for us. Really appreciate it. It's a value trade. And also, use that super chat function, right? All the proceeds go to the Ayn Rand Center. So please help support them. Again, we got John here, who's a great thinker, let's use that super chat function. So, without further ado, as always, I have to throw this disclaimer slide on. As you know, here these are just personal opinions; they don't reflect. It's not investment advice. Nothing I say or John says should be construed as anything of the sort. We're not pitching anything here. We may hold positions in anything we talk about. It's for informational purposes only. You guys all know the drill by now. You have any questions, feel free to ask, but I don't expect that you will. And if I could figure out how to stop sharing the screen, we will just move right along here. So, like I said, everybody, I am joined by John Tamny. For those of you who don't know, John is the editor of Real Clear Markets. He's also a vice president at FreedomWorks and is a Forbes columnist. He's a senior economic advisor to Applied Financial Group, which is a mutual fund firm. He's a prolific author and columnist. He has a new book out, which is titled When Politicians Panicked, The New Coronavirus Expert Opinion and a Tragic Lapse of Reason. He's written a bunch of other books entitled They're Both Wrong, The End of Work, Who Needs the Fed, which is a personal favorite of mine, and Popular Economics. John has had a profound impact on me as a thinker, just in general, but even more so as a person. He's probably the most read columnist in my arsenal, and he always makes me think. And I've grown so much as a person from knowing him, and just from that, I'm just thrilled to have John on. And John, I'll kick it over to you here.
Yeah, why don't you hold up those books some more? No, but seriously, Seth, thank you so much for having me on. It's really, what do they say about trade? That it's mutually enhancing, and it's been so great getting to know you. I've learned so much from you. There are questions that I have where I just don't know how to approach a subject. One of the obvious ones that stands out was negative interest rates, and you came back to me with answers that it really helped shape my thinking. So it's been great knowing with you and working with you and learning with you. So
yeah, that's heartening to hear. And just before, right off the bat, we have we do have a super chat, a question, not question, but donation. Thank you so much, Jonathan. You know who you are, and really appreciate it. And thanks for all the support that you've given the show on everything. So,
hey, Jonathan, get on Amazon now and buy some books too.
There's definitely a trade there to be done, I'm sure. But John, maybe just kicking off. Obviously I know you, but I'd just love to hear about your background. Kind of what was your path that led you, to this point right now?
Looking back, I suppose it was kind of obvious. I'd always been interested in policy and politics. But economic policy became a passion from a very young age. And I worked actually in New York for Goldman Sachs in their equities division. But even there, my interest was always economic policy. And this was the late 90s, early 2000s. CNBC was always on the floor, and I'm sure it is to this day. And listening to the economists coming on the TV, I thought, boy, they don't really understand even what inflation is. They thought that it was caused by too much economic growth. And I thought that's absurd. I grew up in the 1970s. Inflation is a devaluation of the currency. And so it very quickly became something that I started writing surreptitiously for clients about economics. You weren't supposed to do that, but I did it anyway. And it quickly became apparent that this was just my passion. And so it was kind of devastating at the time. But Goldman Sachs, in the bloodbath of the early 2000s, pushed me out the door along with a lot of other people. And so I gradually moved in that direction. And so ultimately in 2003, I took a job as a fundraiser for the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. I was willing to do anything to get closer to the policy, and gradually started writing for the public just as a writer from Washington, D.C. And very fortunately, through time and lots of hard work and writing at night and on weekends, just gradually developed a following, and slowly just became a policy writer, economic policy, writing books and everything. So it's been a long path, but it's been, this was what I was meant to do, I believe. It's something that I get great joy from.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, one thing, I mean, maybe before we dive into your book, I mean, one thing that draws me to your writing is it's just the perspective is so different, right? Like I mean, I just don't know where it comes from. There's this, it's almost this rebellious streak where you're willing to throw everything out and just kind of look at things through a very clear lens. You know, I mean, I don't know if you would agree or disagree with that, but that'd be question one. And then two, you know, where do you think that comes from? You know, is it just a personality trait? Is it something that you developed over time?
It's great questions. I'm sure I don't want to be flippant, but yeah, personality defect. Why is it that I view things so differently? But as you know, I rarely, and maybe it is just an angry, stubborn streak. If everyone believes something, I'm going to point out why that's just incorrect. And so that it's rare that, yes, you're right. Generally, when you read me, you're reading something that isn't normally said, because I find conventional wisdom about economics completely ludicrous. Now, it's possible that I'm just right, or it's possible that I'm just different, because as we know, and as we've discussed over email, what economists believe in a fairly general sense is just absurd. We are talking about a profession that broadly believes that economic growth causes prices to rise. In fact, a sign of economic growth is the prices of everything are dropping, because inflation investment is making the creation of things quicker and more productive. Economists believe that government spending stimulates economic growth. That is so completely backwards. No, governments that oversee countries that have lots of growth are able to spend lots of money. They're able to extract lots of wealth precisely because there's growth. Economists believe that World War II, all the killing and maiming and just destroying of the very people who power all progress, and the very people with whom we divide up work with around the world on the way to exponentially greater productivity. Economists quite literally said that World War II is what helped the U.S. emerge from the Great Depression. I can't think of anything more horrifyingly and stupid than that.
Right.
But that's what they believe. And so I just, in this world, as you know, just everything that's commonly believed, I exist to point out how ludicrous it is. And so I don't know why that is, but that's who I am.
Well, I mean, take this for what it's worth, coming from one oddball to another. I say that endearingly. I mean, it takes one to know one, right? So, thank you for doing what you do, because it's a perspective that's greatly needed. I won't even get down the whole inflation, the inflation wormhole. I have my own kind of thinking on that, and that is just so out there. But maybe another time, or
yes,
or you know, we'll need drinks for that. I don't know if that's FCC allowed or not. But anyway, let's move on to your book. I mean, it's you know, couldn't be more topical than right now, especially for our friends in the UK, right? So I'm just curious, why did you write the book? You know, what needed to be said that you said?
Why did I write the book? Because what I witnessed unfolding, whereby politicians chose lockdowns, whereby they chose economic desperation as a virus mitigation strategy, struck me as the most colossal backwards error really in my lifetime. Now, I lived in the late 20th century, and so I'm very familiar with communism. So I can't say it's the worst human rights tragedy. So many awful things happened before the 21st century, but I think it's fairly easily the dumbest policy error and the biggest human rights violation of the 21st century. They chose economic contraction to fight a virus, locking people down, shutting down businesses, taking away the right of people to work. This is so backwards. I mean, you look throughout history. Let's go back to the 19th century and consider what medical care was like back then. So in the 19th century, if you broke your femur, you had 1 in 3 chances of death. But if you lived, the only option was amputation. If you broke your hip, you were going to die. When you were born in the 19th century, you had as good of a chance of dying as you did living. Cancer was a certain death sentence, but see, most people never got to cancer because pneumonia, which was captain of man's death, and tuberculosis, things like that, killed you first. What's important about this is this was true even in the early part of the 20th century. In 1910, in the United States, rich United States, cancer was still a distant 8th among killers. And so what changed? Why suddenly do we die of old age? Does anyone realize what dying of old age, what a sign of progress that is? Why do so many Americans die of cancer today? Right. Why do they get Alzheimer's? Wait, these are all really advanced, in so many ways, rich country concepts to die from. Well, because of economic growth. Economic growth produced the resources that doctors and scientists could be matched to, such that they could come up with answers for that which used to readily kill us so young. Let's never forget that World War I was the first war in the history of the world in which more people died from guns and bombs than they did from just general disease.
Yeah.
And so this was John D. Rockefeller. He was probably the biggest author of this remarkable future, the richest man who ever lived. In his lifetime alone, he gave away $530 million, and 450 million of it went to medical science and research. And so suddenly doctors and scientists were coming up with the answers.
Yeah.
And so we were essentially able to die once, twice, 3 times, but live, because we could suddenly survive what used to so easily kill us. And so economic growth has always been the biggest enemy of death and disease. Yet politicians chose economic contraction to fight this virus. Historians will marvel at the abject stupidity of this. And so I felt it was essential to tell this story. We cannot let it be said in history books in the future that a virus caused a global economic contraction. No, nail-biting politicians did.
That's right. And it's really interesting because like you said, the cure, right? The real way out of this. And even if you look at today, right? I mean, how are let's take the whole virus and the effects out of it. But if you look at how people are reacting or how life is resuming, right? It's because of, vaccines, right? For example, right? People are getting vaccinated. Well, what is the source of vaccines? They don't just come out of the air, right? They don't fall out of the sky as manna, right? Like they are done by companies. They're done by people and scientists and large R&D budgets who are working to solve problems and make the world safer for us, right? So it's really interesting. And something you said really struck me, which was the old age diseases that we're suffering with now. If you think about it, we're so ill-equipped to handle them because they're new, right? These are relatively new problems, right? We don't have the data, right? Like we have long reams of data of how to fight pneumonia, for example, right? Because that used to kill people by the scores. But today, to deal with these advanced age diseases, like it's a new thing and it's a huge sign of progress. And I don't want to call it a badge of honor because that's a misplacement, but it's something like that. So I mean, that's, and I think you're like this perspective, I think that you're bringing up is you don't hear anyone or very few people are bringing up this perspective, John, in the media, right? There's a very popular narrative that's very pro lockdown, and that we're doing the right, pro sacrifice in a way, right? Just to get through it. It's only 2 more weeks until we bend the curve. So I think it's a really important message for people to hear. I mean, in your view, when you think about, what we know now, like, how do you think it should have been handled?
Well, it should, you allude to the 2, just give us 2 weeks. because we want to protect the hospitals. Let's give the hospitals time to prepare.
Right.
The very notion of that, okay, that it was ludicrous on its own, that it's just going to be 2 weeks, but that's almost beside the point.
Right.
Among us needs, if being free and being out and about and going to bars and restaurants would cause you to have to go to the hospital, well, so why the force? See, generally, I don't need to be told to avoid behavior that, if I engaged in, would cause me to be very sick. We knew people long before the virus started spreading who never opened up doors. They would open up their doors with their elbows. They were constantly washing their hands. And so if suddenly it's this virus that will hospitalize me, boy, I'm going to take precautions of my own. I don't require force. And so the very notion of this from the beginning defied basic common sense. Now, some people watching might say, okay, yeah, but John, don't you realize, see, you've got common sense. There's a lot of dumb people out there.
Obviously,
and my response is, the dumb people are the most important people of all.
Right.
How did we miss this? The dumb people who reject the expert opinion, who say, we're going to go out to every bar, pub, party, make out with every girl and guy. You need those people. The people who reject expert opinion, who don't lock down, teach you how the virus spreads by being the guinea pigs. By getting out there, we find out, oh, so does this behavior associate with hospitalization and sickness?
Right. That's a good
There's
point.
so much we don't know. And so you want free people trying different things so that you can know things. And so everything about 2 weeks made no sense, lockdowns in general, because anything that's one size fits all blinds us to essential information. Why does this virus spread? And what behavior is most associated with spread?
That's a very interesting perspective. And I don't think I've heard anyone say that. Like, the amount of data that we were robbed from by this centralized response, right, is really, it's a shame. And now you could say, Seth, well, people would have died. Well, the fact is two things. One, we don't know whether or not people would have died. That's the fact, right? The fact is we don't know because we don't have that data. But number two is these are also people who would have done so voluntarily. And this is important, right? And this is what you were kind of alluding to, John. Like, there's an implied ethics that underpinned kind of all these discussions. That was not that I don't know if people actually were aware of them or not, but exactly to your point, if you have you used the word guinea pig, but these are people volunteering to go out and essentially do the experiments for us, because their risk reward situation is different, right? We're all have different risk reward situations, and it's just wrong to put your own context on other people. Yeah, no, it's very interesting.
Wrong. And again, who knows? Yet people would have died. Well, people did die. And so what's got to be understood is that people would have died. But if they died, if suddenly people who hung around pubs and bars and parties and make out kings and queens were dying, that would be the signal. Okay, these are the things you shouldn't do. See, now we still don't know. And people say, no, we know. Well, wait a second. Yeah. So this is a show that's largely being watched in England, if I'm correct. As I point out in the book, When Politicians Panicked, in the 1980s, the assumption in England from the experts, the National Health Service, was that 1/5 of Brits would get AIDS. Well, there was no cure for AIDS at the time. So Brits were going around, oh, wow, 1/5 of us are going to die. Now, in the United States, we had Anthony Fauci. He's been around for a long time. And so he was writing stuff in the 1980s saying that AIDS was just easily transmittable, just husband and wife, family members in the same household, not even contact. You could get it that way.
Yeah.
Turns out the experts weren't just wrong, but stupendously wrong.
Right.
And so to presume that they knew everything right away about the virus defies common sense. And furthermore, it is a demand of them that we're asking the impossible of them. There's no way they could know. And in the beginning, AIDS, we knew so little.
Right.
To presume that they knew everything in the early days of the virus spreading, oh, please, they didn't. And so these people going out and defying convention, living freely, are heroic.
Yeah,
They wouldn't have died, it turns out, but
that's an interesting.
freedom's not just a virtue. It's not just that it creates economic growth that frees us, that leads to cures. Free people produce information, which is the most crucial thing of all.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. I mean, when you think early on, we knew so little. I mean, I'll tell you, like I live in New York City. Like this is the epicenter of kind of where the virus is going on, and like it was scary. Like I was scared. Like I would mask on. I'd walk out. I'd see someone, and like I'd like almost cross the street just to to the other side because it was because I was looking at the numbers. I mean, the numbers were very scary. It was exponential growth up. The hospitals were full. I mean, we were treating the disease wrong. I mean, but it's a really good point that you brought up where early on there's so much that we don't know. And I don't want to write off experts because I think that's also kind of an error that people make. It's like, oh, like experts don't know anything. Well, it's like, no, we don't know anything. And it's how you treat the evidence from not knowing to as the evidence unfolds that I think is really it's almost missing in this response, right? It's so like I'm really curious, like how did you think about how did you think about the evidence as it was unfolded, and like how do you think like action should have how do you think they should have like dictated actions, right?
Well, you hit on something so crucial. You said we shouldn't dismiss the experts, and you're right. You're absolutely right. But we also demand too much of the experts. And so my view from the early days was it's possible that Anthony Fauci is brilliant. It's possible that these experts around the world are some of the most brilliant people walking the earth. But let's imagine Anthony Fauci in Wembley Stadium next year for, I don't know, a soccer match. He might be the most brilliant person inside Wembley, but the people in the stands, their collective knowledge will be exponentially at a level greater than his. It wouldn't even be close.
The wisdom of crowds. Right?
They're decentralized. They're disparate. Their combined knowledge would be remarkable. And so what am I describing? Well, I'm describing a market. Why? It's not that the Soviet Union didn't have experts. It's not that Cuba and North Korea have experts. They've got brilliant people.
Absolutely.
Anytime you take decision-making power from the people and move it into the hands of very few, you get central planning fails. It fails every time. And so it's so fascinating. Politicians said, unless we act, there will be a crisis. They were making a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once politicians act, they were taking away freedom. They were suffocating the market, which is knowledge, and saying we are going to give decision-making power to very few people. So they naturally created a crisis, and you've seen this.
There you go.
Millions of jobs destroyed in the US alone, millions of businesses either destroyed or impaired. It's true in England, it's true around the world. Once you empower politicians to do something, that is the crisis. They are the crisis. Experts are the crisis, not because they don't create knowledge, but they can't possibly know what we know combined.
Yeah, they created a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's almost like heads I win, tails you lose. But I just want to really thank Marvin again. Thank you for your generous donation, and Jonathan topping us off. I love it. Thank you so much, guys. If you have any questions, for John, this is a real treat. Feel free to ask in the chat. Use that super chat function. We're going to try to be watching it. I hope you're enjoying this. I'm loving this. We're here with John, Tamny. John, I'm curious. Like, what was the most interesting part from writing this book, or the biggest thing you learned, right? I mean, because writing is such at least, for me, I've a monthly column, right? That's, pittance, right? In comparison to a book, or let alone books. But I always learn something, as I go through the process. So I wonder if there's anything, any takeaways from you, that you had from yourself.
Yeah. To me, this because we've emailed and talked offline. To me, writing is the path to knowledge. And so you always learn more by writing it down. And in this case, it's not that I had a lot of knowledge, because I don't claim any knowledge. I'm making an argument. This is an economics book. This is not a medical book. There's lots of medical books out there, and there will be, about the virus. Mine is economics. You just don't crush an economy to fight a virus. You don't limit freedom to fight a virus. And so I'm making an argument about markets and economics. And so I think in writing about this, even greater clarity came to me about the importance of politicians not doing things. Probably the biggest revelation, it was something that I knew, but it had never occurred to me. You know, people say, well, so-and-so, this country's economy is the engine of the world. And it became more apparent to me what that means in writing this book. And it's, let me be clear, it's when the US takes a break from reality, the world implodes. And it does for the simple reason people will say, oh yeah, Americans consume less. Yeah, to some degree it's that. You know, Bangladesh is the sewing machine of the world now. And so Americans suddenly just lock down. But let's never forget that what we produce in the United States constitutes a great deal of, quote, global demand. I'm not a Keynesian, but let's never forget that Americans, we have people from around the world here, and their production amounts to remittances to around the world. So suddenly when the US took a break from reality and said, oh yeah, we're going to check out and be absurd, the remittances to the Philippines, to El Salvador, around the world declined. In El Salvador, you had people quite literally, what they do is they put up essentially white flags in their houses. This is their way of communicating. We are starving. We need food. And they were not getting, because the dollars that used to fund eating in El Salvador disappeared.
Right.
And so think about what happens when we do. And so you had around the world, we talk about the suffering in the United States. We're a rich country. Government can throw trillions at the problems they create. It's wrong, but people weren't starving in the US.
Right.
Around the world, 285 million people headed, rushing towards starvation as a consequence of this arrogant view that we could just, and decadent view, that we could just stop producing and just say, oh, well, we've got to separate the very people who've driven all progress, because suddenly they're a lethal menace to one another. Have you ever heard something more absurd in your life? But that's what prevailed, and the people around the world suffered in a sick, sick way.
Yeah.
Decadence.
Yeah, it's very interesting. John, I have a question for you coming in. I hope it's okay.
Sure.
You know, what is your knowledge of or perspective of on Ayn Rand?
I was given Atlas Shrugged in 1994, and I began it and couldn't stop. And so Ayn Rand, for me, I know about her. I've read New Yorker columns about her. She's a remarkable person. I love her bluntness and everything. So she's just my kind of person, so contrarian. And so what she meant for me is that I always believed in this stuff, but Ayn Rand had such a muscular view of capitalism and what it meant, and she elevated these people. And so for me, I think one reason a lot of Randians like me is that I have a worship for the producers, for the productive class. I have a worship for investment bankers, the people who bring capital to these visionaries. And so Ayn Rand made it possible for me to more muscularly approach this in the way I do. And that, oh yeah, when I'm talking about these people, these are my Zeuses, these are my heroes. Look at what they do. What do entrepreneurs do? The definition of an entrepreneur is someone who believes something deeply that no one else does. And then they rush this better, much more life-enhancing future into the present. And so I am Randian in that maybe I was always naturally that way. Atlas Shrugged confirmed for me my views, and that I love what they do. I don't want to live in a world without these capitalists. And so I'll give you one more Ayn Rand story. In this New Yorker article years ago about her, they talked about how after the great Michael Milken was needlessly prisoned, one of the greatest capitalists who ever lived, was tragically prisoned, that Randians, they beautifully did this. They sent stacks and stacks of Atlas Shrugged to him in prison. And so when Bill Gates was needlessly raped by our Justice Department in the late 90s, I sent him a copy of Atlas Shrugged. That was my way of honoring him. That look at what these loser lowlifes are doing to you. I support the creators of the future.
Yeah, I
So
think reading, as an avid follower of your work, there are two things that really stand out for me, and I encourage you to read, John. And for these two reasons, I promise you will be challenged, because the default is a standing contrast to what I'm about to say. The first big takeaway that I get from you, John, is you are a hero worshiper, and I think there's a cynicism toward heroes today. In our culture. They can't be real. And that too is very evident in Rand, right? We're like, to use your words, you worship the producer. And for me, and for a lot of people, that is all that is spiritual. But there's also something else that really sticks out for me. And it's probably challenged me the most psychologically speaking. And it's your benevolence, right? You have, for those who are familiar with the term benevolent universe, you epitomize this benevolent universe attitude where good always triumphs over evil. And for me, it's very refreshing. I want to thank you for that. It's been, it changes the way how I think. John, I want to be respectful of your time. We're just kind of coming up on the hour. I maybe have one closing question for you. I mean, what do you think free people should do in response to your message of your book?
Free people should never forget free people need to tell this story over and over again. Because if we don't tell it, history books will say that a virus caused a global economic contraction, that we had to do this. No, we didn't. Free people could have handled this perfectly. And in fact, free people were handling it for months. The virus had been spreading for months, and people were living their lives. The other thing that I would say is that don't get too caught up in the statistics. Let me be clear. In the book's penultimate chapter, I talk about the statistics, and I do for a reason. I basically limit them to one chapter because I say, here's all the information that I gleaned from New York Times, Wall Street Journal, all interesting stuff that supports the argument that, oh boy, did they overreact. I mean, wow, colossal.
Right.
But if we make this a statistical argument, we win the battle but lose the war. If we make it a statistical argument, we imply that politicians have the right in the future to take away our freedom again, to take away our right to work, to operate a business, our right to live. The argument has to be first, last, every time freedom. I would be against the lockdowns even if you could prove to me that they led to a higher death rate. You can't, but I would be against it.
Right.
Freedom is the most important thing, because, and if we move away from that, we know that this isn't the last virus to spread around the world. And so we know that there in the future, experts will go to gullible politicians and say, well, this time is different. We really need to take away freedom again, because boy, if we let people act the way they want this time, a lot of deaths will occur. No, wouldn't happen, because people respond to incentives. They would change their lifestyles. So we have to begin with freedom. We cannot make the statistical. That's, I think, the most important message of the book, that the argument for freedom wins on its own. Don't cheapen it with statistics.
Yeah. And I think, I think that's a very powerful statement. And I think anyone who is kind of familiar with the objectivist ethics would sort of connect the principle. Freedom is best because of the ethics underneath that underpin that, because of the metaphysics, because of the epistemology. Of course, freedom wins, right? It shouldn't be a surprise. Freedom follows from just what I would say the facts of reality. But with John, I'm going to close it out here. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I had a blast. I hope you'll do it again.
Likewise.
For everyone else, guys, this is John Tamny. I mean, I cannot recommend his writing more. You could read his columns, you could read his books. He will challenge the way you think, I promise. And whether you agree or not, that challenge alone is worth it. It's a huge mental exercise. So John, why don't you tell people where they can follow you, and we'll wrap up.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I'm on Twitter at John Tamny. All my books are on Amazon. So you got that. I'm editor of Real Clear Markets, as Seth mentioned. And so I usually put out 3, sometimes 4 columns a week. And so I'm a very active writer. Again, I think writing is the path to clarity and knowledge. And so I do a lot of it. Again, I'm very lucky to be able to do what I do. I love my work. Can't get enough of it. So you can find me generally in those places. And thank you. That really, I can't stress enough how flattered I am that people would take the time to listen to me about these things. But these are important subjects, and we need to tell our story.
Yeah. Well, with that, I just want to thank you, John, again, and I want to thank everyone on the super chat. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Marvin. We'll see you again next week. And have a great weekend, everyone.